Pandora is a Vegas Pro application extension developed by myself with help from Edward of jetdv.com, a rich source of scripting tutorials for Vegas Pro. I developed the extension to automate many of the tasks in Vegas Pro that I found were repetitive and time-consuming. Consequently, as these are my solutions, some of the tools in Pandora may not appeal to all users. I released version 1 of Pandora in August of 2023 and described all the tools in my tutorial 98. In May 2024, I released version 2, having added 3 more tools and modified an existing tool to make it more useful. I described these additions in tutorial 112. In this version, I've added 2 more tools to the collection. I've also made a number of improvements and one fix for an issue that had become apparent recently. In this tutorial, I'll describe these extra tools and how to use them. For those who have not watched the original tutorials, I'll also explain how to install the extension. There'll be a link in the description so you can download and install it. There'll also be a help file in PDF format that describes each tool in detail. I won't be describing all the tools in the collection in this tutorial. However, I will briefly describe the improvements made to specific tools. If you're unfamiliar with Pandora, it's advisable to watch tutorials 98 and 112. For this version, there are 4 files to download. The download link is in the tutorial description. Pandora V03.dll is the extension, and Pandora V03.dll.config is its associated configuration file. After downloading, the tool files should be moved to this directory. If the directory doesn't exist, simply create one using exactly that name. If you currently have Pandora V02 installed, you should delete the file Pandora V02.dll. The other 2 files are Pandora V03 release notes.pdf and Pandora V03 help.pdf. These files are for reference only, so can be stored in a convenient folder. After the DLL and config files have been moved to the required directory, launch Vegas Pro, select View, then Extensions, and select Pandora V03. The Pandora interface should then appear with the other tabbed windows. If it appears in an undocked window, it can be docked with the other tabbed windows using the normal docking method. Once installed, the extension will remain tabbed unless you change the window layout. It will also appear the next time you launch Vegas Pro. Note that the configuration file Pandora V03.dll.config contains default parameter values used for the initial launch of Vegas Pro. A separate configuration file is created upon launch, which thereafter is used to store user input parameter values. Despite the file Pandora V03.dll config becoming redundant after the initial launch of Vegas Pro, it's advisable not to edit or delete it. If you've used Pandora before, you'll notice the difference in the user interface. John, my son, who is a software developer, happened to see the UI and immediately described it as old school. He told me that, to bring it into this 21st century, I would have to make some major changes. I wasn't offended by this and asked him for some advice. He made some changes to the UI of one of the tools, and I propagated those changes to the others. The UI now looks clean and simple. Another advantage is that it's more compact, so releases more of the Vegas Pro user interface. Another improvement, which I hinted at earlier, is that parameters entered when using the tools will be saved when Vegas Pro is exited. When Vegas Pro is relaunched, the parameters will be repopulated with the saved values. If you have more than one version of Vegas Pro installed and have changed any of the parameters from default, those changes will only apply to the version where the changes were made. While testing Pandora, I had to keep creating video and audio tracks every time I launched Vegas Pro. I decided to produce a tool that would do that for me. It's a simple tool that allows the required number of video and/or audio tracks to be entered into the two input boxes. Let's say I wanted 3 video tracks and 2 audio tracks. Clicking the Apply button creates those tracks. Note that video tracks will always be placed above audio tracks. When I'm shooting video, most of my clips are static as opposed to panned. I make them about 8 seconds long to allow for any camera shake at the start and end of the shot. When editing, my first task was to trim those clips to about 5 seconds. In my opinion, a static shot normally shouldn't last for more than 5 seconds. Any longer, and there's a danger that the viewer may get bored. Shortening these clips was a long and tedious job, so I decided to see if I could produce a tool that would do the majority of the work for me. This is the Event Adjustment tool. To demonstrate this, I've populated the timeline with some clips. It's important that this tool is used before any editing is carried out, so these clips are straight out of the camera. You'll see that some clips, I'll refer to them as events from now on, are short and some are long. The short ones are the static shots. To adjust the lengths of these short events, I simply select all of them by using Control-click on each one. Now I need to decide on a few factors. The first is how long I want the events to be. This is determined by the seconds and frames input boxes. Let's say I want each of the selected events to be 4 seconds and 5 frames long. Now I'll click the Apply button. The selected events are now 4 seconds and 5 frames long. You can see that reducing the duration has left gaps in the timeline. This is because the ripple checkbox is disabled. I'll enable it and apply again. Now the gaps between the selected events have been closed. Now I need to decide if I want the start of the events to be trimmed, and by how much. I included this because when I press the record button on my camcorder, the action tends to jerk the camera, resulting in unwanted movement. The lead-in trim option will eliminate this movement. Usually the movement only lasts for a few frames, so I'll enter 5 in the lead-in trim input box. Now when I measure one of the events, it's 4 seconds long. This is because of the lead-in trim, so it's important to note that the final event length will be the requested length minus the trim length, and you should factor this in when deciding the final length of the event. The next factor to consider is what I call reduced duration only. I included this checkbox because, under certain circumstances, a short event may be lengthened due to the requested length being greater than the event length. This would introduce a loop point in the event, which is undesirable. To prevent this happening, if the reduced duration only checkbox is checked, only events with a duration greater than the requested duration will be adjusted. Here's a demonstration. This event is 6 seconds and 19 frames long. I'll include this event amongst a number of other selected events. I'll choose 8 seconds as the new duration. I'll also uncheck the reduced duration only checkbox. Now to click the apply button. If we examine all the selected events now, you can see that, as well as being adjusted to 8 seconds, a loop point has been introduced in 3 of the events corresponding to the original length of the events. Now I'll carry out the same procedure, but with the reduced duration only checkbox checked. You'll now see that the events longer than 8 seconds have been shortened to 8 seconds, while those shorter have been unaffected and therefore no loop points occur. Now regarding the trim function, there are 3 types of event where it's not possible to apply a leading edge trim. These are an empty video event, an empty audio event, and an adjustment event. If you try and apply a trim to any event of these kind, nothing will happen. It is possible, however, to adjust their lengths. A point to note if you have the Ripple Events checkbox enabled. Because rippling only affects selected events, it's important that event adjustment is carried out early in the editing process. There's a third checkbox labelled Lead-in Trim Only. This is provided for occasions when it's necessary to trim the leading edge without adjusting the total length. With this checked, the second and frames input box values are ignored. Finally, if all you wish to do is adjust the length without trimming the leading edge, simply enter a 0 into the Lead-in Trim Only input box. This tool will add a titles and text event to a selected video track. Because of this, a problem could occur if more than one video track was selected. An event would be added to each selected video track in sequence, starting with the topmost selected track. Because the cursor would be at the end of the event after each event is added, the next event would be added to the next selected video track at that cursor position. If there were any video events on these extra tracks, they could be disrupted. For this reason, I've introduced a warning message if more than one video track is selected. Because two video tracks were selected, the addition of a second event disrupted the second video track. I'll undo that operation and try again. This time I'll select No. Because the tool doesn't know which track is valid, the process will abort. In version 2, markers created by the tool had to be deleted manually. In version 3, there's a Delete Markers button that deletes markers created using the tool. Markers not created by the tool will not be affected. Now, because I performed an undo earlier, the Delete Markers function displays an error message. It's not possible within the code to detect that an undo function has occurred. If I hadn't included an error trap, Vegas would have crashed. After the error message is accepted, markers that have been generated by the tool will need to be deleted manually if required. In version 2, to apply the tool, a timeline gap had to be made equal to or greater than the titles and text event before the event was added. In version 3, a ripple checkbox has been added so that the timeline events are moved to allow a gap for the titles and text event. Note that markers created by the tool are not rippled, so if an event is added before an existing event, that existing event's marker will not move with it. Let me demonstrate. Now, if I place the cursor before the last event and click Apply, see what happens. The third event has moved to make room for the added event, but the third marker has remained in its original position. In version 2, some tools required both the video and audio parts of an event to be selected. Failure to select the audio part resulted in that part being unaffected by the tool, resulting in it being out of sync with the video part. Version 3 doesn't require the audio part to be selected, as you will probably have noticed. In version 2, help text was provided in a separate tabbed form. This made it difficult to formulate reasonably detailed help text for each tool. Version 3 provides help in the form of a separate window for each tool, actioned by a help button on each tool's window. The Apply Crossfades to Selected Events tool in version 2 only allowed one selected sequence of events to be crossfaded. If more than one sequence of events required crossfades, they had to be actioned one sequence at a time. Version 3 allows multiple selected event sequences to be actioned at the same time. One important thing to note about this tool: if the timeline time format doesn't match the project frame rate, the crossfade duration may not be equal to the frame's input value. If you find that the crossfade duration is incorrect, check the timeline time format. The Insert Event tool in version 2 had a serious issue with the Insert Adjustment Event option. The Adjustment Event Pan Crop produced a blank display in its UI, something I had failed to pick up during my testing. This has been corrected in version 3. I've also included a Ripple Events checkbox in version 3. I've carried out extensive tests on this version to ensure that there are no obvious or obscure bugs. However, with an application as complex as this, it's impossible for me to guarantee that issues won't arise. Please read the terms and conditions in the About tab. I have only been able to test the UI on a full HD monitor, so I would be grateful if anyone using this on a UHD monitor would let me know, either on the Vegas Pro forum or a comment on my YouTube channel, if UI issues are encountered. Thanks for staying with me, and I hope the toolbox is useful to you.